Okay, this is technically old news, so I apologize, but the other day we did make a video talking about the Vancouver Canucks and their contract negotiations with Elias Pettersson. In this video, we cited a Donnie and Dolly segment from a few days ago, wherein this information was revealed, which led to us, talking about it. The thing is, in this same video segment on Donnie and Dolly, you had yourselves another piece of information regarding the Vancouver Canucks and certain players needing contracts that also was interesting enough that I wanted to make a video about it on its own. It's just, this is being pushed a few days later because there were a few other things that popped up in there that were interesting to talk about too. But today we are talking about the Vancouver Canucks and one of the main free agents that they want to sign. Rick Dhaliwal has the quote. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and listen to the video by yourself. But of course, copyrighted material. We're just going to say what it is that Dhaliwal says on air in this video. But pretty much, the Vancouver Canucks, according to Rick, are still poking around on current free agent Phil Kessel. And this is a name that I think a lot of folks in the hockey world recognize and probably love as well. Kessel is a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, and a guy who is coming off of the longest Ironman streak the NHL has ever seen. Now, he has played 82 games consistently for a decade plus pretty much, with a few other years thrown in there with shortened seasons and the COVID year, etc., etc., the lockout year in 2012-13. Other than that, though, Phil Kessel has been an absolute stud ever since starting out that Ironman streak. His Toronto Maple Leafs days were legendary. He was a Pittsburgh Penguins Stanley Cup champion with 90 points in a season. He went over to Arizona, chilled out a little bit, still produced some points, and last year he played with Vegas where he had 36 points in 82 games played. Now, the thing is, I know what some of y'all might be asking, hey, Phil Kessel hasn't signed a contract yet. What's up with that Ironman streak? Is that still going? And yeah, it's still technically going. The rule here for the Ironman is that you've got to play all the games that you're eligible for. Playoffs don't count, so it's only regular season. And for Phil Kessel, because he is not signed with any NHL team, the Ironman streak is still technically there. The Ironman streak will only be broken once he announces his retirement, or if he signs a contract and then gets scratched in any one of the games in the future. There were rumors in the offseason talking about how apparently Kessel would be willing to forfeit his Ironman streak if it meant signing with a team, because not every team is going to go out there and definitively say, okay, yeah, we're going to sign you, you're going to be a cheap player, and you're going to be an 82-game guy. We're going to consistently give you a role in every single game of this season. Sure, Kessel, when he was getting 90 points a year, was easy to do that, but if you weren't going to say that he's a top-tier guy anymore, it's a little bit more difficult to solidify anybody's job certainty in the lineup realistically. And so Dhaliwal says that the Canucks are still poking around on Kessel, and that they were poking around on him earlier in the offseason. They wanted to sign him then, they still want to sign him now. And the interesting thing that Dhaliwal points out is that Phil Kessel absolutely loved, capital L-O-V-E-D, loved playing under Rick Tocchet with the Arizona Coyotes. There also is another link in that, hey, Phil Kessel was a Pittsburgh Penguin under Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. And so there are already more than one links to Phil Kessel from the Vancouver POV, and the way the information is presented, it makes it seem like there would be a healthy amount of mutual interest between Phil Kessel and the Vancouver Canucks. Just to be clear, though, Dhaliwal doesn't specifically say that Kessel wants to sign in Vancouver. He just kind of says that there's some history there. And he also says the Canucks want to sign him, so if you could make your logical conclusions there, I mean, this would be probably an easy one to come to. But when it comes to what's holding this entire thing back, Dhaliwal straight up goes out there and says, hey, the Vancouver Canucks need to free up cap space. It's Garland, it's Beauvillier, it's one of these guys that's going to be on the move, and once somebody gets sent away, once a defenseman comes back that's maybe a little bit cheaper, once the Vancouver Canucks navigate their own cap, then signing Phil Kessel will probably be somewhere on their priority list, or at least pitching out to him once more and trying to get him to sign with Vancouver. Of course, you have to assume that he's not going to sign anywhere else, or else this entire thing doesn't work. But the idea of trading away a guy like Beauvillier, for example, let's just say Beauvillier out, Kessel in. Let's ignore the defenseman for now, we'll talk about that in some other video. But if you trade away Beauvillier and you add a Kessel to play in that lineup, honestly, I kinda like that. Like, not to say that Phil Kessel is the most well-rounded defensive forward ever, but I do think he could be a tad better than Beauvillier. Connor Garland, I'm starting to lean more so on the side of saying no, I want to keep him, because Garland has been playing really well, admittedly, the past few games here and there. He just works so hard, he's so feisty, he's always stealing the puck. Not that Kessel doesn't have that same level of pace. I mean, he was one of the faster players when he was in his heyday, and even still recently, he's still found ways to put the puck in the back of the net, score some assists. He was in Arizona for Rick Tocchet for a while, and interestingly enough, when he was in Arizona, that's when he more so became like a playmaker. 44 assists in 82 games played in his 21-22, which contrasted so starkly to his only 8 goals in that season. It's interesting because Phil Kessel was never really known to having, like, not to be rude, but the most, like, approachable and super cool, amazing personality. Like, there were moments, especially in the Toronto media, where Kessel would get a little bit snarky with the microphones, and it certainly made for some great entertainment value. Kessel, you kind of have to have a super stern personality to survive the Toronto media, especially when Kessel was the guy whom everybody put pressure on every single game for 6 years. So for Kessel to be in a position where he's kind of got this hard-nosed type of personality, which is totally fine, not going to say that he is a bad dude or anything because of that. When Rick Tocchet, who is also equally much of a hard-ass, is going out there and telling this guy what to do, when you see Kessel form a bond with Rick Tocchet that extends further than all the other coaches that Kessel had, you start to realize that this is really just the kind of guy that Rick Tocchet is. I mean, we had seen JT Miller, and the transformation he's gone through, he's also an equally hard-nosed kind of athlete. So for Rick Tocchet to be able to connect to Miller and to see a bond there actually grow in bigger and better ways than Miller and Green had, or Miller and Boudreau had, it makes a lot of sense, actually, when you say that, yeah, Phil Kessel loved playing for Rick Tocchet too. This is just the kind of personality that warms up more so to the Rick Tocchet coaching style. And to hear that if Phil Kessel would be interested in sticking around with Tocchet a little bit more, going over to a GM, managerial staff that he's familiar with Rutherford and Alvin, why not come to Vancouver? Especially if the Canucks are still finding ways to win, let's say, throughout the entire season. Let's say they make the playoffs. What are the odds the Canucks make the playoffs? I think it's a pretty good chance right now, over 50%, I would say. So if the Canucks are in a playoff run, would you not want some expertise from a guy like Phil Kessel, who has won the dance 3 times already? I don't know, if you're taking out a guy like Beauvillier and putting in Kessel, like, I kind of like that. I don't know about you, but I know you could say, oh, he's old, he's washed, he's this, he's that. Do you really need this kind of a guy? You'd be taking away ice time from a Höglander or a Podkolzin, and while that may be true, I don't know, if you're coming at this from the perspective of the Vancouver Canucks being competitive now and wanting to do stuff in 2023, 2024, then I see no issue with the idea of going for Phil Kessel, especially if there would be interest from him in return. Right? So, I don't know, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Vancouver Canucks targeting Phil Kessel, the idea that he would be interested in coming to Vancouver too, his link with Rick Tocchet, his link with Patrick Alvin, Jim Rutherford, etc., etc. If you trade away a guy like Beauvillier, if you free up the cap space, if you have some extra money to spend, is Phil Kessel the guy that you'd feel comfortable going out there and spending that money on? It's not like he's the most amazing player in the world, he's no longer a 90-point caliber guy, but it's Phil Kessel, for crying out loud. If he does come to Vancouver, it's not like he's going to be the mainstay guy like he was in Toronto. Like, this could be a passing of the torch in a way, from Canadian media to a guy who was known for eating hot dogs, looking like a big rig truck driver, and for winning Stanley Cups over and over again. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Phil Kessel. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.